The abduction was a silent, swift terror, not a single alarm blared, no dramatic tractor beam ripped them from their beds. One moment, Maya was sketching fantastical creatures in her Tokyo apartment, the next, a disorienting wave of nausea washed over her, and the familiar scent of cherry blossoms was replaced by a sterile, metallic tang. Similarly, deep in the Amazon rainforest, young Kai, learning the ancient ways of his tribe, felt a prick on his arm, followed by an unnerving lightness as the jungle vanished. Halfway across the world, in a bustling Mumbai slum, Rohan, a master of street chess, simply blinked, and the cacophony of the city was gone, replaced by an unsettling quiet. These weren't random choices, though the Zyrith believed they were selecting specimens based on perceived human vulnerability. They were, in fact, gathering the seeds of humanity's most tenacious traits. Maya, with her artistic vision and meticulous observation skills, possessed an innate ability to analyze and adapt. Kai, raised in the unforgiving wilderness, knew survival instincts that were practically coded into his DNA. Rohan, a child of the streets, was a master of strategy, capable of outmaneuvering opponents far older and more experienced. Other children joined them, each plucked from diverse corners of the globe: a resourceful farm girl from Iowa, a coding prodigy from Seoul, a young mechanic from Lagos. Initially, fear reigned. The cold, gray corridors of the Zyrith ship, the looming insectoid figures of their captors, the utter lack of familiar comforts, it all threatened to overwhelm them. But beneath the surface of their fear, a spark of defiance flickered. They were children of Earth, inheritors of a spirit that had weathered millennia of challenges, and they were about to show the Zyrith just how wrong they were. The Zyrith, a species evolved from hive insects on a dying world, operated on a principle of ruthless efficiency and unwavering logic. Emotion was seen as a weakness, individuality a threat to the collective. Their society was a perfectly ordered machine, each member a cog performing its designated task. They viewed other species through this lens, categorizing them based on their perceived usefulness and tractability. Humans, with their messy emotions, chaotic societies, and unpredictable behavior, were initially deemed insignificant. However, a subtle shift in their algorithms, prompted by a rare energy signature emanating from Earth, a byproduct of human creativity, though they couldn't decipher it, led them to reconsider. Perhaps, they reasoned, these humans could be studied, their adaptability harnessed, their biological processes understood and potentially exploited. Their initial observations, gleaned from intercepted broadcasts and satellite imagery, reinforced their biases. They saw humans squabbling over resources, polluting their planet, and engaging in self-destructive behaviors. They saw children glued to screens, seemingly passive and easily manipulated. They concluded that human children, in particular, would be docile subjects, easily controlled and readily yielding data. This hubris was their undoing. They failed to grasp the depth of human resilience, the power of human connection, and the fierce protective instincts that lay dormant beneath the surface. They saw only weakness where strength resided, only chaos where adaptability thrived. They believed they were bringing lab rats onto their ship. They were bringing a pack of wolves. The Zyrith's sterile, logical minds couldn't comprehend the complex tapestry of human experience, the very thing that would ultimately unravel their carefully constructed world. They were about to learn that underestimating humanity was a fatal error. The holding cells were sterile cubes, devoid of color and personality. Each child was confined to a separate space, monitored by hovering drones with emotionless lenses. The air was thin, recycled, and tasted faintly of ozone. The Zyrith, in their misguided attempt at scientific control, had stripped away everything familiar, everything that might provide comfort or a sense of identity. They believed this would make the children more pliable, more receptive to their experiments. Maya, despite her initial terror, began to catalog her surroundings: the smooth, seamless walls, the rhythmic hum of the ventilation system, the subtle shifts in gravity. Everything was data. She noticed that the drones followed predictable patterns, their sensors blind to certain frequencies of light. Kai, drawing on his ancestral knowledge, focused on his breathing, slowing his heart rate and calming his mind. That he observed the subtle variations in the cell's temperature, the faint vibrations that ran through the floor, mapping out the layout of his prison in his mind. Rohan, ever the strategist, feigned despair, conserving his energy while subtly testing the boundaries of his confinement. That he discovered a minute flaw in the cell's locking mechanism, a potential weakness he filed away for later use. The Zyrith, observing their captives through their emotionless drones, saw only compliance. they recorded the children's vital signs, analyzed their brainwaves, and administered a series of rudimentary tests, oblivious to the subtle resistance brewing beneath the surface. They saw the children as data points, not as individuals. They failed to recognize the glint of intelligence in Maya's eyes, the controlled calm in Kai's posture, the deceptive resignation in Rohan's movements. The children were learning, adapting, and preparing. The experiment had begun, but it was not proceeding as the Zyrith intended. The cages were only temporary, the isolation couldn't last. The children, despite their diverse backgrounds and the language barriers that initially separated them, possessed an innate need for connection, a fundamental human drive that the Zyrith had failed to account for. During the brief periods when the cell doors slid open for the distribution of nutrient paste, a bland, gray substance that barely qualified as food, furtive glances were exchanged, tentative smiles offered. That IT began with Maya, using her artistic skills. She began to draw symbols on the cell walls during the brief periods when the drones were recharging, images that represented basic concepts: food, water, danger. Kai, recognizing the universality of visual language, responded in kind, adding his own symbols, drawn from ancient tribal lore. Rohan, with his quick wit and knack for observation, quickly deciphered their system, becoming the primary translator. The language barrier began to crumble. They discovered shared words, common phrases that transcended cultural boundaries. Help, run, safe. Gestures became crucial, conveying emotions and intentions that words could not. A pointed finger, a raised eyebrow, a subtle nod, each gesture carried weight, forging a bond of understanding that the Zyrith could not detect. A natural hierarchy emerged. Maya, with her analytical mind and artistic flair, became the de facto strategist, devising plans and identifying weaknesses. Kai, with his survival skills and knowledge of the natural world, became the scout, assessing risks and finding resources. Rohan, with his street smarts and strategic thinking, became the negotiator, mediating disputes and finding common ground. They weren't just a collection of individuals anymore, they were a team, a unit, a force to be reckoned with. The Zyrith had created the perfect conditions for a rebellion, and they were too blind to see it. The first act of defiance was small, almost insignificant. During the nutrient paste distribution, Rohan, using a sharpened piece of plastic he painstakingly chipped off a discarded container, managed to disable one of the monitoring drones. That IT wasn't a permanent fix. The drone would be repaired or replaced eventually, but it was a symbolic victory, a clear signal that they would not be passive victims. The act itself was carefully planned. Maya had observed the drone's charging cycles, identifying the precise moment when they were most vulnerable. Kai had used his knowledge of pressure points to distract the Zyrith attendant, creating a brief window of opportunity. Rohan, with his nimble fingers and unwavering focus, executed the plan flawlessly. The immediate aftermath was tense. The other drones swiveled, their lenses focusing on Rohan. The Zyrith attendant, a towering figure with multifaceted eyes, let out a series of clicks and whistles that conveyed irritation and suspicion, but the children remained calm, feigning ignorance and innocence. The Zyrith, lacking the ability to understand human expressions, couldn't discern their deception. The disabled drone was quickly retrieved, and the incident was dismissed as a malfunction, but the children knew better. They had struck a blow, however small, against their captors. They had proven that they were capable of resistance, that they were not as helpless as the Zyrith believed. The event served as a catalyst, emboldening them and solidifying their alliance. That IT was a testament to their combined skills, their unwavering determination, and their growing confidence. The Zyrith may have controlled their bodies, but they could not control their spirits, and that, the children knew, was where their true power lay. The rebellion had officially begun. With the drone incident behind them, the children turned their attention to gathering information. Maya, leveraging her observation skills, focused on deciphering the Zyrith language. She noticed recurring patterns in their vocalizations, correlating them with specific actions and objects. Kai, utilizing his heightened senses, mapped the ship's ventilation system, discovering hidden access points and alternative routes. Rohan, with his innate understanding of social dynamics, began to analyze the Zyrith's behavior, identifying individual quirks and potential vulnerabilities. They learned that the Zyrith were highly regimented, adhering to strict routines and protocols. They communicated primarily through pheromones and ultrasonic clicks, a language that was both complex and subtle. They relied heavily on technology, displaying a surprising lack of improvisation when faced with unexpected challenges. they were also deeply hierarchical, with a rigid caste system that dictated every aspect of their lives. Most importantly, the children discovered the Xyretha's fear. They were terrified of contamination, meticulously sterilizing everything they touched and avoiding direct physical contact whenever possible. This fear stemmed from a devastating plague that had ravaged their homeworld, leaving them with a deep-seated paranoia about germs and disease. This knowledge became their greatest weapon. They realized that they could exploit the Xyretha's routines, their technological dependence, and their fear of contamination to their advantage. They began to formulate a plan, a daring strategy to disrupt the Xyretha's control and seize control of the ship. The Xyreth saw only children, but they were dealing with strategists, survivors, and saboteurs. The game had changed, and the children were ready to play. The sterile environment of the ship offered little in the way of conventional tools, but the children were nothing if not resourceful. They transformed discarded containers into makeshift knives, using the sharp edges to cut through restraints and pry open panels. They unraveled threads from their uniforms, weaving them into ropes and nets. They learned to manipulate the ship's internal temperature, creating pockets of extreme heat and cold to disorient their captors. Maya, drawing on her artistic skills, created distractions. She mixed pigments from the nutrient paste and used them to paint intricate patterns on the walls, diverting the drone's attention and creating opportunities for the others to move undetected. Kai, with his knowledge of the natural world, identified edible substances within the ship's ecosystem, supplementing their meager rations and providing them with much-needed energy. Rohan, utilizing his street smarts, learned to manipulate the ship's communication system, intercepting Xyreth transmissions and planting false information. The children's ingenuity extended beyond mere survival. They began to weaponize their environment. They discovered that the ship's cleaning solution, when mixed with certain organic compounds, created a noxious gas that could incapacitate the Xyreth. They learned to short-circuit the ship's lighting system, plunging corridors into darkness and creating chaos. They even managed to reprogram a maintenance bot, turning it into a mobile distraction unit. Every scrap of material, every glitch in the system, every oversight by the Xyreth was an opportunity, a chance to turn the tables and gain the upper hand. They were transforming the sterile prison into a battleground, and they were ready to fight. The guerrilla war began subtly, a series of coordinated disruptions designed to sow chaos and undermine the Xyretha's control. The children, divided into small, agile teams, launched targeted attacks on key systems and infrastructure. One team, led by Rohan, infiltrated the ship's food processing unit, contaminating the nutrient paste with a harmless but visually alarming substance. The Xyreth, panicked by the perceived threat of contamination, shut down the entire unit, disrupting their carefully planned feeding schedule and creating widespread unrest. Another team, guided by Kai, exploited the ship's ventilation system, releasing a concentrated dose of the noxious gas they had concocted into the Xyretha's living quarters. The gas, while not lethal, caused temporary paralysis and disorientation, leaving the Xyreth vulnerable and disoriented. Maya, meanwhile, focused on disrupting the ship's communication network. Using her knowledge of the Xyreth language and technology, she created a series of false alarms and misleading messages, sowing confusion and paranoia among the Xyreth ranks. She also managed to isolate certain sectors of the ship, preventing the Xyreth from coordinating their response and reinforcing their defenses. The Xyreth, accustomed to order and predictability, were ill-equipped to deal with the children's unconventional tactics. They responded with brute force, increasing security and tightening restrictions, but their efforts were futile. The children were like shadows, moving silently and striking swiftly, exploiting every weakness and vulnerability. The Xyreth were losing control, and they didn't know how to stop it. The ship, once a symbol of their technological superiority, was now a hunting ground, and they were the prey. The first Xyreth to fall was designated Overseer 7, a mid-ranking officer responsible for monitoring the children's sector. Overseer 7 was meticulous and observant, but also arrogant and dismissive, convinced of the superiority of the Xyreth intellect. This arrogance proved to be his undoing. Kai, using his knowledge of the ventilation system, managed to isolate Overseer 7's chamber, cutting off his communication with the rest of the ship. Maya, mimicking the Overseer's vocal patterns, sent a false distress signal, luring him into a darkened corridor. Rohan, waiting in ambush, used a makeshift net to ensnare the Overseer, trapping him against the wall. The ensuing struggle was brief but intense. Overseer 7, despite his superior size and strength, was hampered by the confined space and the children's coordinated attack. they used their makeshift knives to slash at his limbs, targeting his vulnerable joints and sensory organs. They exploited his fear of contamination, throwing vials of the noxious gas in his face, causing him to convulse and gasp for air. Finally, with a desperate heave, Kai managed to knock the overseer unconscious. They bound him with their makeshift ropes, gagging him to prevent him from alerting his comrades. They had captured their first prisoner, a tangible victory that sent a shockwave through the ship. The capture of Overseer 7 was more than just a symbolic victory. It provided the children with valuable intelligence. They learned about the Xyretha's command structure, their security protocols, and their ultimate objective. They also acquired a key, literally. Overseer 7 carried a universal access key that could unlock nearly every door on the ship. The game had changed. Again, the children were no longer just resisting, they were actively taking control. The Xyreth response to Overseer 7's disappearance was swift and brutal. Security was doubled, patrol routes were intensified, and the children's sector was placed under constant surveillance. The Xyreth, realizing the extent of their miscalculation, abandoned their detached scientific approach and adopted a more aggressive, punitive strategy. Rations were cut, access to water was restricted, and the children were subjected to harsh interrogations. The Xyreth, desperate for information, used sonic weapons and psychological manipulation to break their spirits. They threatened to separate the children, to subject them to painful experiments, to abandon them in the cold vacuum of space. But the children refused to break. They had tasted freedom, they had felt the thrill of resistance, and they would not surrender. They endured the hardships, supported each other, and clung to the hope of liberation. The Xyrethas' increased aggression only strengthened their resolve, turning their fear into a burning desire for revenge. The stakes had been raised. The children knew that they were no longer just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for their dignity, their freedom, and the future of humanity. The Xyreth had underestimated them, had seen them as docile subjects, but they were about to learn the true meaning of human resilience. The war had escalated, and the children were ready to meet the challenge. They knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and sacrifice, but they were prepared to pay the price. They would not rest until they had overthrown their captors and reclaimed their freedom. The fight was far from over. The Xyretha's crackdown claimed its first victim, Aiko, the coding prodigy from Seoul. She had been instrumental in manipulating the ship's communication systems, a vital asset in their guerrilla war. During a routine patrol, the Xyreth discovered a hidden access panel in her cell, revealing her clandestine activities. Aiko, knowing her time was up, used her remaining moments to send a coded message to the others, warning them of the Xyretha's discovery and urging them to continue the fight. She was swiftly apprehended, dragged away kicking and screaming, her desperate cries echoing through the sterile corridors. The other children were devastated by Aiko's capture. She had been a close friend, a valuable ally, and a source of inspiration. Her loss served as a stark reminder of the dangers they faced and the price they might have to pay for their freedom. Kai, consumed by grief and rage, wanted to launch an immediate rescue mission, but Maya, ever the strategist, cautioned against recklessness. They couldn't afford to jeopardize the entire operation for a single individual. They had to remain focused on their ultimate goal, seizing control of the ship. Aiko's sacrifice, however, did not go in vain. Her coded message provided them with crucial information about the Xyretha's security protocols and their planned counteroffensive. Armed with this knowledge, they were able to anticipate the Xyretha's next move and prepare their defenses. The loss of Aiko was a blow, but it also strengthened their resolve and unified their purpose. They would avenge her death, and they would not rest until they had achieved their freedom. Her memory would fuel their fight. Using the access key acquired from Overseer 7, Maya and Rohan, with Kai providing overwatch, infiltrated the ship's navigation center. It was a high-risk maneuver, but they knew that controlling the navigation systems was the key to their escape. If they could alter the ship's course and send a distress signal, they might have a chance of being rescued. The navigation center was heavily guarded, but the children had a plan. They used a combination of stealth, deception, and brute force to overcome the Xyreth guards, exploiting their fear of contamination and their reliance on technology. Maya, using her coding skills, disabled the security cameras and disrupted the communication systems. Rohan, with his street smarts, created diversions and exploited the Xyretha's blind spots. Kai, with his survival instincts, provided cover and neutralized any threats. After a tense and harrowing battle, they managed to secure the navigation center. Maya immediately began working to alter the ship's course, plotting a trajectory back towards Earth. Rohan, meanwhile, tried to activate the ship's distress beacon, hoping to alert any nearby vessels to their plight, but just as they were about to succeed, the Xyrath launched a counterattack that a squad of heavily armed Xyrath soldiers stormed the navigation center, trapping the children inside. A fierce firefight ensued. The children, using their makeshift weapons and their wits, fought bravely, but they were outmatched. During the battle, Rohan was critically injured. A blast from a Xyrath weapon struck him in the chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. Maya and Kai rushed to his side, but it was clear that his injuries were severe. He was fading fast. Rohan, with his last breaths, urged Maya to finish what they started. He revealed a hidden compartment in his makeshift vest, containing a modified transmitter he had been working on in secret. "Send the signal," he rasped. Tell them we're here." With tears streaming down her face, Maya took the transmitter. Kai, his face etched with grief, stood guard, determined to buy her enough time to complete the task. He knew that Rohan's sacrifice had given them a chance, a slim hope of rescue, and he would not let it be in vain. Ignoring the Xyrath soldiers closing in, Maya focused on the transmitter. It was a crude device, cobbled together from salvaged components, but it was their only hope. She quickly calibrated the frequency, inputting the distress code that Rohan had painstakingly deciphered from intercepted Xyrath transmissions. Just as the Xyrath soldiers breached the navigation center, Maya activated the transmitter. A faint signal pulsed out into the vastness of space, a desperate plea for help from a group of children fighting for their survival on an alien ship. Whether anyone would receive it, whether anyone would respond, they couldn't know. But they had done everything they could. Now, it was time to fight. Kai, with a primal scream, charged at the Xyrath soldiers, drawing their fire and giving Maya a chance to escape. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his movements swift and deadly. He knew that he couldn't win, but he could buy Maya time to complete their mission, time to alert the world to their plight. Rohan's sacrifice, Aiko's sacrifice, would not be in vain. The signal was sent. Now, they had to survive long enough to be rescued. Maya, knowing that Kai was buying her precious time, slipped through a maintenance hatch and disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors of the ship. She had to find a way to regroup, to strategize, to somehow turn the tide against the overwhelming Xyrath forces. Meanwhile, Kai fought like a whirlwind, his movements a blur of speed and precision. He used his knowledge of pressure points and his mastery of improvised weapons to disable the Xyrath soldiers, one by one. He knew that he couldn't defeat them all, but he could make them pay a heavy price. As Kai battled valiantly, the distress signal that Maya had sent reached its destination. On Earth, at a remote monitoring station nestled deep within the Australian outback, a lone technician noticed an anomaly in the data stream. A faint, distorted signal, unlike anything he had ever seen before. He initially dismissed it as a glitch, a random fluctuation in the cosmic background radiation, but something about the signal nagged at him. It seemed intentional. He ran a series of diagnostic tests, filtering out the noise and amplifying the signal. To his astonishment, he discovered a pattern, a complex sequence of pulses that seemed to convey information. He ran the signal through a decryption algorithm, and the truth hit him like a thunderbolt. It was a distress call, sent from somewhere far beyond Earth. The technician immediately alerted his superiors. The news spread like wildfire through the ranks of the military and the intelligence agencies. The world held its breath. Could it be true? Had humanity finally made contact with extraterrestrial life? And if so, was it a friendly encounter, or a desperate plea for help? The answer, they knew, lay on a ship far beyond the reach of Earth, where a group of children were fighting for their survival against an implacable alien enemy. Kai's valiant stand bought Maya enough time to escape, but he was eventually overwhelmed by the Xyrath soldiers. He was captured and brought before the Xyrath commander, a towering figure radiating an aura of cold authority. The commander, designated Unit 734, was the architect of the abduction program, the one who had initially dismissed humanity as insignificant. Now, face to face with one of the very specimens he had deemed so inferior, he couldn't hide his surprise, and a flicker of something akin to respect. Maya, having regrouped with the remaining children, a resourceful mechanic named Lena from Lagos and a stoic farm girl named Sarah from Iowa, devised a daring plan. Using a combination of stealth, deception, and their knowledge of the ship's systems, they would infiltrate the commander's chamber and confront him directly. They knew it was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but they had nothing to lose. They had already lost Aiko and Rohan, and Kai's fate hung in the balance. They would not let their sacrifices be in vain. using the ship's ventilation system, Maya, Lena and Sarah managed to bypass the security checkpoints and reach the commander's chamber undetected. They burst into the room, catching the commander off guard. The commander, despite his shock, remained composed as he unleashed a torrent of ultrasonic clicks, summoning his guards, but Maya had anticipated this. Lena, using her mechanical skills, had disabled the communication system, cutting off the commander from his reinforcements. A tense standoff ensued. The children, armed with their makeshift weapons, faced the towering figure of the Xyrath commander. The fate of the ship, and perhaps the fate of humanity, hung in the balance. "It's over, Commander," Maya declared, her voice trembling but firm. "Your experiment has failed. That we are not your docile specimens. That we are humans, and we will not be controlled." The commander, his multifaceted eyes narrowed, responded with a chillingly calm series of clicks. "You are merely delaying the inevitable. Reinforcements will arrive shortly. Your rebellion will be crushed." "Maybe," Maya conceded, "but by the time your reinforcements get here, it will be too late. That we've already sent a distress signal. Earth knows what you've done." The commander's expression flickered with a hint of unease. That he knew that if Earth intervened, his mission would be compromised. That he had to act quickly. That he lunged at the children, his powerful limbs moving with surprising speed, but the children were ready. Lena unleashed a cloud of the noxious gas they had concocted, disorienting the commander. Sarah, using her knowledge of pressure points, targeted his vulnerable joints, slowing him down. Maya, with her sharp intellect, anticipated his every move, guiding her companions and exploiting his weaknesses. A fierce struggle ensued. The children, despite their size and lack of training, fought with courage and determination. They used every trick they had learned, every weapon they had crafted, to overcome the Xyrath commander. Finally, after a grueling battle, they managed to subdue him. They bound him with their makeshift ropes and gagged him to prevent him from alerting his comrades. They had won. They had defeated the Xyrath commander and seized control of the ship. The ship was theirs. With the Xyrath commander subdued, Maya, Lena, and Sarah raced to the ship's communication center. They had to establish contact with Earth, to let them know that they were safe and that they had control of the ship. Using their combined skills, they managed to bypass the Xyrath communication protocols and establish a secure channel with Earth. A crackling voice filled the communication center. "This is Earth Command. Do you read? Identify yourselves." Maya stepped forward, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "This is Maya," she said. "We are the children who were abducted by the Xyrath. That we have taken control of their ship." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, a barrage of questions followed. "What is your location? What are your intentions? What is the status of the Xyrath?" Maya answered their questions calmly and concisely, providing them with all the information they needed. She explained that they had sent a distress signal, that they had fought for their survival, and that they had managed to seize control of the ship. As she spoke, a fleet of Earth ships appeared on the horizon, their powerful engines blazing. The cavalry had arrived. The Xyrath ship was quickly surrounded, and a team of heavily armed soldiers boarded the vessel. They found the children in the communication center, exhausted but triumphant. They also found the Xyrath commander, bound and gagged, lying helpless on the floor. The soldiers were stunned. They had expected to find a scene of carnage and destruction, but instead, they found a group of children in command of an alien warship. The children were not captives, they were victors. The children returned to Earth as heroes. They were greeted with parades, awards, and the adulation of a grateful world. Their faces were plastered on every newspaper, their story told and retold in countless documentaries and movies. They were symbols of human resilience, courage, and unity. But beneath the surface of their newfound fame, the children were forever changed. They had witnessed horrors that no child should ever have to see. They had lost friends, they had faced death, and they had been forced to make impossible choices. The experience had stripped away their innocence, replacing it with a hard-earned wisdom and a profound understanding of the value of human life. They had learned the importance of unity, of teamwork, and of standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Maya, Lena, and Sarah, along with Kai, who was miraculously rescued from the Xyrath prison, dedicated their lives to promoting peace, understanding, and cooperation among nations. They established a foundation to support children affected by war and violence, using their experiences to inspire hope and resilience in others. They never forgot. Aiko and Rohan, or the sacrifices they had made, their memory served as a constant reminder of the price of freedom and the importance of fighting for a better world. The Zyrith abduction had been a tragedy, but it had also been a catalyst that IT had revealed the best and worst of humanity, and it had forged a new generation of leaders, determined to build a future where such horrors would never happen again. The children, once victims, had become the architects of a new world. Their ordeal had transformed them into something more, something stronger, something truly extraordinary. The world was in their hands.